If you're a big enough Bills fan that you've made your way to the show, then I'm sure that you've by now seen Brandon Beane's interview with WGR 550, and just something that we got to touch on a little bit. A pretty spicy interview, pretty hot. And my first thought hearing this was like, oh, the draft just ended, and here's a little taste of the types of things that we're going to get to talk about all off season. I don't know if this is the same for every fan base across the league, or if this comes from the place of Bills Mafia passion, but it always seems like there's that next storyline, that next drama, the next big thing happening. And in this case, it was Brandon Beane coming on to WGR 550 for his post-draft radio spot, and just right out the gates, coming in hot. And if you haven't heard it already, take a listen to it. I'm not going to get into too much of the direct quotes or anything here. But basically, it came about. The segment on the radio show was breaking down the draft and talking about how they wished a receiver was taken. And Brandon Beane starts off his interview just talking about them bitching about wide receiver. Sounds like 2018 when people wanted Rosen and didn't like Allen. But the meat and the potatoes was, should the Bills have taken a receiver? And Brandon Beane defending his stance on why one wasn't taken until later. And for this portion of the show, it might sound like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth here, and maybe I am. I see both sides to this. I don't have criticisms per se with either side. I think things could have gone a little bit differently. But starting out with Brandon Beane. So as a guy that does a podcast, as a guy who in my normal life has certain levels of professionalism and such that I'm expected to meet, I do think to a certain extent that this is a bad look for Brandon Beane, of not being able to take criticisms in stride and feeling the need to defend himself, and not only getting worked up about somebody's opinion, but also to the point of you're cussing them out on their own show. And I worked in restaurants for a very long time, and this is the issue that I have with Brandon Beane in this circumstance, and we'll get to my fan perspective after this. But he's coming into their job, right? And they're not really necessarily allowed to match his energy because of professional standards that they have to be held to, that they could be punished for. And I never really like when there's that power imbalance where one person feels like they can say whatever they want and you're doing it to me at my job, so I just have to roll with the punches. So from that perspective, I think it's a bad look for Beane. I think to a certain extent makes him feel like he's got thin skin. I will say that he's been around for years and I've never really seen anything like this. So a little one-off I'm fine with. Also, by the time we get to football games being played, we're all going to forget this ever happened. But it's where we're at right now. From my fan side perspective of it, I kind of love it. All those things that I just said still being true, I think it's showing me a certain level of juice and urgency and frustration, and maybe it's exhibiting itself in the wrong way. But this team has had a ton of success since Beane and McDermott got here, and a ton of coming up short opportunities. And to be sitting here right after the draft, planning for the next season, it kind of feels like they're turning the page, but they're still a little bit hot from last season, and they're ready to look forward, but there's that fire there. And I'm not saying that passion doesn't always exist. I'm not saying that they're just always buttoned up behind closed doors. But as fans, we get to see what we get to see, and that's about it. And what we've seen is all very buttoned up, professional, coach speak type stuff. And part of me wants to see that anger, that passion, that fire, knowing how close we've been for so long and coming up short, and just seeing that juice from the top. I like that as a fan. And I've seen a bunch of people on Twitter comparing this to the Sabres organization, and the Sabres being terrible for so long. And there's just none of this juice. There's nobody coming out getting all pissed off. There's not people getting fired. There's not people cussing each other out. It's just like, meh. And it feels like loser mentality. And I guess to an extent, you could say getting emotional and popping off on a radio show could be loser mentality too. But the dichotomy of the two situations, if I have to choose between the two, I'm taking the GM that's passionate and fired up right now. As far as the meat and the potatoes of where this conversation started, it was basically radio show hosts. They wanted to see an investment in receiver, and Brandon Beane explaining why that didn't really happen this year until later in the draft. And this is, again, a thing where I see both sides to it. On the one hand, yes, I would love for this team to get a high-end receiver to give to Josh Allen. I would love to see it on a rookie deal, so you're able to have that cost-controlled option that's really producing. I think drafting skill positions, it's sexy, it's fun, it sells tickets, all of the things. And on the other hand, from Beane's perspective, yes, the Bills were just one game away from the Super Bowl. The offense isn't what was really costing them games last year. They had a prolific offense, the best scoring offense in Buffalo Bills history. And they did that without one of these marquee guys. And I think both things can be true. And I wanted receiver investment in this draft, and it probably would have started somewhere around round 4-ish. Kind of look at the way the board shakes out and the people that they brought in for visit and the type of receiver that they wanted to get. It does seem like guys that they thought might be there were going right before they were drafting. And maybe this is why Brandon Beane was a little fired up. Maybe he felt like he got finessed in the draft a bit, and touchy subject for him still. But on the other side of the coin, I'll be honest, my initial reactions to this draft, and none of this really matters until football starts being played anyways, but my initial reactions to this draft is this is in contention for my favorite draft from Brandon Beane in his tenure with the Bills. And I think we can look at how many playoff losses we've taken where we're talking about firing Sean McDermott, and it's because he's a defensive coach and the defense is what let us down. And I'm looking at the positions being took in this draft, and it's really trying to get the defensive line right, which is something he's been trying to do for years in different ways, and it hasn't gotten there. And I can understand wanting to give Josh Allen as many weapons as possible. I can also understand the point of view of this guy was just the MVP. He did it last year when we said we weren't giving him any talent. And we're going to load up the defense because that's what's been letting us down in the playoffs. That being said, I also think that there is some context of recent drafts that do matter. And you go back to drafting James Cook for the offense in the second round and him being just an awesome player in this offense. You go back to Kincaid being a first-round pick that you traded up for. You go to Coleman last year. And I do think there is a certain level coming out of this draft of a thought process that we've already made those high investments and we need those to shake out. And we talk about this all the time. Hope is not a plan. But for a guy like Kincaid, I look at, he had a top 10 rookie tight end season all time. Last year was not the same season. It was a bit of a disappointment follow-up from his rookie season. I think we can all agree on that. But to me, that was also, if you're rewatching the games, there's just something a little off with the timing and the chemistry with Allen. And I don't think a ton of the woes from Kincaid last year were completely on him. And you factor in dealing with injuries, and the big injury that he was dealing with ends up being a knee injury that he only sustained because he was overthrown on a ball from Josh Allen. Now, maybe he timed his routers and that was on him and Allen put the ball where it was supposed to be. Maybe it's on Allen. But he was open for what should have been a walk-in touchdown, and he ends up having to lay out for a ball and injures his knee in the process. We'll see what happens next year. Very similar with Keon Coleman of, I know this isn't a lot of people's flavor at receiver. It's not, the pick was not really my flavor at receiver. But before the injury, he was really starting to look like he was developing and stacking some games together. And I see you, Keon. he gets injured and he was never the same after that. Call it maybe a rookie wall, maybe dealing with an injury at the pro level and the way that it sidelined their rookie year. A lot to figure out there still. But between these two guys, can't act like no talent has been given to Josh Allen. And I guess I'll wrap it up here of hope not being a plan. I think that goes for this offense too. I think that just because you had the best scoring offense in franchise history last year doesn't mean you're going to have that again this year. It's very hard to have year over year sustainability in the NFL. All of the things that go into this, what kind of injury luck you can have. Another year with Brady as the offensive coordinator could help the team, but it could also give opposing teams another year of being able to figure out what you're doing. We have, like I said, we're kind of hoping for a step from Coleman, from Kincaid. You're hoping that Josh Palmer is the player that you think he can be in this offense. You're hoping that Curtis Samuel is the guy that you thought you were signing and he can stay healthy, which is a huge if. But I think that in believing that, I think that you can have a plan for the offense kind of regressing to the mean a little bit. And your plan for that can also be, let's have the defense be more reliable, more impactful, more game-changing, to give the offense more opportunities, to put the offense in better situations, so that if the offense does come back down to earth a little bit, the defense can pick up the slack. And I think it's less exciting for draft day picks, for big investments to be trench play and all this. That being said, I think it takes all phases of the game to consistently win and to get to that ultimate goal of winning the Super Bowl. And you hear it all the time, defense wins championships. Going all the way back to the shootout with Kansas City in overtime, going to the 13 seconds game. These were games where Josh Allen and the offense, with whatever weapons were there at the time, left the field with the lead. And Patrick Mahomes comes back out, is able to march right down the field on this defense, and that's how we get eliminated from the playoffs. So all that to say, I would love adding a high-end receiver to this team for Josh Allen. I also don't have a issue to an extent with it not being addressed through the draft. There is also the fact that we have until August, September, before football games are being played, before rosters have to be set. We see, like, as this radio show spot is happening, it gets announced that Elijah Moore is coming in for a visit. There's going to be other guys that shake out, cut down days through teams setting their rosters. And are you looking for a receiver that you add to be in the top 3? Don't know. I think you're probably adding a wide receiver 4, right? Wide receiver 5. Maybe a guy that's competing with Coleman for a depth chart position. But there's still like 5 months to get this roster set. So I'm not getting too high or low on anything right now. We'll see what happens. There's still more free agency that can happen. There's still trades that can happen. There's a ton of movement that can happen still. So we'll see how it all shakes out throughout the course of the summer and kind of it there.